Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Connections with myself, Cameron Bunch, and my father, Dr. Randy Lane Bunch. Last week, we kind of got into a topic that might be more sensitive for some people, and we talked about women in ministry. And obviously, in this podcast, we are very pro women in ministry and them being pastors and elders and deacons and operating different offices of ministry. And we laid out in scripture why we see that and where it might be more culturally where people are biased against or misinterpreting of scripture. But if you're at all curious about that, please go back and check out last week. But since last week was more of I would say, a tense subject in church culture, I think we're going to take a step back this week and do more of a relaxed podcast style and just kind of talk about life balance, whether it pertains to Christianity or ministry. I think oftentimes people, especially in America, we have this very much, I think in some aspects it's dying, but there's still very much an aspect of the American dream, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get stuff done, accomplish it. And I think especially when you're an entrepreneur, and anyone who starts a ministry is that entrepreneur mindset. And so it's very much you got to go, work, work, work. And if you're not producing something, it's not valuable. And I think oftentimes we look for what is discernibly physically in front of us that is a result. Where are the ones and zeros going? Is the church attendance going up? Is the church budget going up? Etc. And so I think we're going to just dive into what does life balance look like in ministry and in our Christian life? Are we always supposed to be? And I think sometimes it can be a mix of church guilt or condemnation we even place on ourselves of, well, Jesus said the Great Commission. When was the last time I got this many people saved? When was the last time I was discipling this many people? When's the last time I did a miracle? When's the last time? And we start putting all these expectations on ourselves because we look at the lives of some individuals who were inordinately blessed to have incredible ministries like the likes of Billy Graham or Smith Wigglesworth, Lester Summerall, giants of faith who just had very powerful ministries. And we're like, well, I'm not doing that. So what am I doing? And not everyone's called to that. So I think without further ado, do you want to just kick it off, Dad, and start talking about this subject?
Yeah, in fact, I would go so far as to say most people are not called to that and shouldn't be. Um, I know that when Billy Graham was asked one time, what would you do differently? If I'm not mistaken, he said, I would take more time with my family. At one time, my spiritual father, Brother Hagin, said he had to be away from his house 85% of the time, away from his family. And that was for a season. Of course, it wasn't always. But when we would hear his son, who's now like 80 something, but he was obviously a child at that time, and he would talk about the sacrifice that he as a son made, and that sometimes hugging their dog on the back porch had to replace an absent dad. And fortunately, it didn't hurt him. He obeyed God in doing this extreme sacrifice, and Ken Jr. ended up following him into the ministry. But these things are not without high cost. And when you and I were talking the other day, we were just kind of spitballing about different things. And the more I talked, the more I realized that this was kind of on my heart. And really, not only because it's um, a pandemic within ministry that ministers burn out, that ministers feel this inordinate pressure, whether it's perceived or genuine. Sometimes it's just their own ambitions that are driving them, and sometimes it's expectations of people, maybe even congregations, or an imaginary voice that they feel is telling them, do more, all of the above. And I think there's a great verse that the Apostle Paul tells Timothy that I thought would be a good kind of like starting spot for us, Cameron. And Paul's telling Timothy about being diligent in the ministry, but he also says this, verse 16 of 1 Timothy 4, take heed to yourself and to the doctrine, continue in them, for in doing this you will save both yourself and those who hear you. So in one sense, he's saying, Timothy, take your own medicine, but he's also saying, it's not just all about the teaching, it's not all about the doctrine, or we could say it's not all about the ministry. It's also take heed to yourself. Self-care is essential for longevity in ministry. And a lot of people sacrifice themselves, even worse, sacrifice their families oftentimes, to chase some ambition or pressure. Either way, neither one of those are good motives or motivations. Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So how did we translate that into, no time for family, no time for self, no time for recovery, no time for reflection, no time for anything other than just, go, go, go. And so, I think this is an important topic, Cameron, because, and some people hearing this might say, well, I'm not in ministry, but you may have a career or you may have even family responsibilities and you're overwhelmed and consumed by that. I deal with people who are caring for loved ones, for example, and that can become all encompassing to where they lose themselves in the care for an aging or dying family member. And so self-care, Cameron, is important in every aspect of life. But when it comes to ministry, you and I understand, and a lot of the people listening to us will understand that sometimes our ambitions can choke out our success and we end up with a legacy of broken families and, crashed dreams because we had this air castle that got built through whatever, whether it was intentional or not. And then it ends up hurting us in the long run.
And I think oftentimes people conflate God and ministry, but God is not ministry and ministry is not God.
Right.
And some people might be like, whoa, Cameron, that's a very thin line you're driving. It's really not. I mean, if you look at 1 Timothy 3:5, it says, if anyone does not know how to manage his own family, how can he take care of God's church?
Yeah.
The reality is, and our priority should always be God first. But I think so many people, like I said, conflate God and ministry. And so they're like, ministry first and then my family, and then like, et cetera, friends, others, whatnot. But the reality is it should be, yes, God always comes first, because if God's not first in our lives, we won't be able to take care of our families or our relationships with our friends. But God first, family next, and then somewhere down that line, ministries kind of come into play. And the reality is every relationship we're in our life is kind of like a triangle of, here's us, here's the other person, God's up here. And the only way to move closer is by moving closer to God with both of them. And both of you have to be moving towards that to be in a healthier relationship. But oftentimes I think we're just so focused on ministry. And so we kind of skew off onto a different axis and we're like, ministry is going to bring me closer. When the reality is, if you're in ministry so heavily focused, and like you said, some people, it might not be ministry, but the reality is no matter what, the order is going to be God and then our family. And it doesn't matter if it's a job that comes later on down the line. Your family comes first. And so I think we get so focused on this axis of performance and trying to feel as though we're accomplishing something for God. Because I think even in our work, we can say, well, by my work, I'm able to support the church and do a lot of great things. Or by my work, I'm able to support my family. But the reality is, when you get to the end of your life and you're getting ready to be put in that coffin, your first thought isn't, man, I'm glad I get to bring all this stuff in the coffin with me. It's, oh, dang, I wish I hadn't missed that game that my kid was so invested in. Hey, I wish I'd been able to show up to this event for them. Hey, I wish I could have done. The reality is, in life, we have to balance things. Yeah, we're not going to be able to make every single probably practice and sporting event them growing up. The reality is there's probably going to be something. But to make the priority be your family versus work. And yes, above all else, like I've said many times, God first, but ministry and work can often wait, because our greatest ministry often is our family and our friends, the impact that we make in them. And I mean, we've talked about discipleship and leadership on this podcast, and we talked about how John Maxwell has been asked many times, what is leadership? And he says, influence, nothing more, nothing less. The reality is our leadership as people of faith should be into our families and into our lives. But if we're so focused on work or ministry that we burn out and then we're useless to everyone else, what good are we really?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think, for illustration's sake, and people are not going to maybe like hearing this, but ministry is a job. If you're a full-time minister, it's your job. It's what you get paid doing. Now, in seasons of my life, I have worked to sustain ministry, but for the lion's share of my life, as you know, Cameron, I was a full-time paid minister. That was my job. And so that's what it is. It's a job. And just like with any other career that's reasonable, has reasonable expectation. Now, some people are climbing the corporate ladder or they're at Wall Street and they run 24/7 and they think, man, this is just, I'm in the middle of the action. And, their lives are so self-absorbed and self-centered. It's all about money and prestige and climbing the ladder and being number one. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a legitimate, rational, human, particularly Christian person. We understand that all of our jobs have limitations. You leave the office at 5 or whatever the time is that you leave. Maybe you work a graveyard shift, but for illustration purposes, you get to work at 8 like I do. You leave at 5 like I do. You cut off the light of the office, you close your computer up, then you go home, and that's the last you think of it until the following day, barring some emergency or something that comes up that requires your time, which we all experience from time to time. but we're able to compartmentalize that part of our life and then, turn our attention to other things that make life life. And even though I love ministry, I love to preach, I love to teach, I love to communicate, absolutely love it. Done it all my life and just want to continue to get better at it. But it cannot consume me and be the only factor in my life. And one of the things, Cameron, that I just, as I'm saying this, I'm reminded of something Paul Scanlon said, a great communicator that you and I both appreciate. And he was talking about what makes a person interesting. And he said, what makes you interesting or how many interests you have. And he kind of made a joke at Christian's expense. He said, if the only thing you're interested in is the Bible and Bible books and Bible commentaries and books about Greek and Hebrew words about the Bible, then the only people you're going to interest are people that want to talk about the Bible, books of the Bible, encyclopedias about the Bible, that kind of thing. So his point being is that if you want to be able to be all things to all men, you've got to be able to reach them through a point of connection that they can relate to. You can't expect them to be all of a sudden all excited about the Greek and Hebrew meaning of whatever. So I think this is where a lot of Christians become irrelevant to people at work, even to their own family members, because if you're not as intense in taking the things of God, quote unquote, as seriously as they are, they feel like you're half backslidden. And the fact of the matter is it doesn't mean people don't love Jesus because they don't want their head buried in a book 12 hours a day. But a lot of times we become so obsessed and see ourselves as the center of the universe and ignore the people around us. And we begin to lose touch with the people that are working 8-10 hours a day in jobs completely irrelevant or unrelated to the things of God. And we're not doing a good job in equipping them to be effective disciples on their job because we can't relate to that. I know for years, Cameron, I was just full-time in ministry, and then I ended up as a safety guy, for 7 years, and I'm pastoring churches, I'm still doing all these other things, but my job was as a safety guy for 7 years. And while I did not love the job because it was not native to my skill set initially, I kind of grew into it. But I learned more about ministry in some respects during that 7 years than I had all the, decades of ministry combined before, because I was able to relate to my supposed audience. Before that, I was thinking of them as just an extension of myself somehow and preaching to them like they were interested in the things I was interested in. I wish I could go back and re-preach every message, through an in their shoes perspective rather than from a ministry perspective.
One of the things that one of the people I look up to in one aspect of their life is Ken Jennings. And for people who don't know who he is, he's like the 75-time winning championship winner of Jeopardy, really famous, known for that. The reason I look up to him in one way is his ability to learn and desire to learn. And the reason why is because in an interview, and I've shared this before, he's being interviewed and someone asked him, why do you know all this? And he's like, well, the reality is, and this because he grew up in a time where you couldn't just pull out your phone and Google something. And even if you do, it's a conversation killer. But he was like, when I meet someone, I can't be like, where are you from? University of Washington? Pull out an encyclopedia, look up University of Washington, be like, so UW Huskies, huh? How are the Huskies doing? Like, he's like, you just have to know that information on the top. And he's like, and the more things you know, the more you can connect with people. Right. That's reality. And when he said that, that just like lit something in my heart. And I mean, even last night, I was having a conversation with some friends that were over, and they're like, how do you know that? Because I just love to collect random information, random knowledge. And I was like, well, I heard it one time when I was like, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, you heard it one time and you remember it? And I'm like, well, I think that like anyone, when we're interested in something, we learn it like that. Because when we're interested, all of a sudden our brain is hungry to retain it and learn about it. And I'm like, and the reality is I'm just hungry and interested in everything pretty much. And the reality is when Paul was preaching in, gosh, where was it? Where was he? In Corinth? I don't remember. It's in around
probably on Mars Hill, probably when he was in Athens.
Yeah, and he quotes some pagan poets and philosophers.
Yeah.
And the reality is, the movies are what we are interested in this day and age. Then it was philosophers, poetry. Maybe they went to watch their version of the Olympics and the games and everything. But for us, it's movies. And so one of the things that I love to do is keep up on movies and TV shows to a certain extent. There are some that I'm just not going to be interested in. But the reason why is that when I meet someone, I'm able to be like, hey, what movies do you like? Hey, what TV shows do you like? I'll even try and watch sports that I don't enjoy just so that I'm able to connect with people on it. I can't tell you, I'm not a sports person. I am just not. I don't enjoy watching football or basketball, but I always pay enough attention to what's going on so that when I meet someone, I can talk to them about it. And I try to find different interest fields that you can connect with people, because the reality is, if you're not keeping up on interests, how are you going to connect to the people around you? And then
Yeah.
also, if you're not developing interests and you realize that, what happens if for some reason something happens in your life and you can't be in ministry or you can't be in your profession that you're in, and then all of a sudden you have to look for something different and you've got nothing.
Yeah.
All you had and all you ever were and everything you made about your life was that one obsession. What are you going to go to next? How are you going to help the people around you? How are you going to help point people to Christ, or how are you going to help your family out in that instance if you're only ever one thing? And don't get me wrong, I don't think that passion and a mild obsession in your field of interest is a bad thing. I think a lot of people have
Not at all.
accomplished great things that way. Bill
Right.
Gates, Steve Jobs, I mean, Elon Musk. Like, I don't care about necessarily these people's personal lives and morals and whatnot, but what they've done and accomplished has been tremendous in their fields of innovation because they were obsessive. And so I'm not saying that, but all these people often had wide interest fields, and that's what influenced their thinking and creativity and always brought them to new innovation. And so I think we need to be people that, like Ken Jennings said, you need to be interested in everything. And I remember one of my teachers in high school told me one time, because someone was like mentioning something, and someone in the class said, "Oh, that's lame." And he's like, looked over and he's like, "Never harsh on someone for their interests, because it's what makes people interesting."
Yeah.
And it's so true. If you have no interest, you're just boring.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've all met that one person that they only ever want to talk about one thing. And every time you see them, they're like, they're going to talk to me about trains. They're going to talk to me about how they just went to the train museum. And they're going to tell me about every locomotive and every motor and every serial number on it. And there are those people, and you're just like, please pick something new. Please bring something. But the reality is, every person we meet has different interest fields, and we can learn something from them, and we can interact with them on a different level if we were to just take the time to be interested and also just relax and enjoy those different interests that are available to us.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you're touching on, but haven't said directly, but I will say it because I've been guilty of this, and I know a lot of preachers that are, a lot of individuals are, but especially in ministry, if we're not careful. So I think especially the younger we are, but we're talking about narcissism. And when you become self-involved in your interest, and that's all you want to talk to people about, you come across like a narcissist, and people think like the guy's only interested in what he's interested in. He's not interested in me. He's not interested in the things I'm interested in. And you can start talking about something and they'll be listening kinda until you say something that reminds them of something about their interest, and then they're launching right back into that again. And there have been so many conversations like that I've had with people. I just, well, time, I'm sorry, I have to leave now, because it's just a waste of my time because I'm not interested in that thing. I might be willing to listen and grow and learn it, but if my whole relationship with them is going to have to evolve around me always coming over to their interests and never being able to engage in thoughtful conversation about other interests, then what you're basically saying is, I'm going to stalemate you in this little small corner of reality, and that's where I'm going to live and stay, and I'm going to drag you over here, and I'm just not going to stay in that little, 3x5 pen with them. And so I think we have to be careful that we don't become so self-absorbed thinking that, because it's so easy to defend it, say, but you don't know how important this is. Well, to you, but it may not be important to other people. And regardless of how important it may really be, if they're not interested in it, you're losing them. So as you said, you've got to find points of interest. That's what the Apostle Paul said. He said, in 1 Corinthians 9:16, the verse that we were alluding to, for if I, no, I'm sorry, 1 Corinthians 9:19, he said, for though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all that I may win the more. And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I may win the Jews. To those that are under the law, as under the law, that I may win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law toward God, but being under the law toward Christ, that I may win those who are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I may win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that by all means I may save some. And so what he's saying is, I found points of connection with people through the things they were interested in, through their belief systems, through the things I know they valued. And one of the things people value, Cameron, is themselves and their own lives and their children and their families. And if we can't step outside of ourselves and begin to engage in the world and kind of pull ourselves out of our little ivory tower, our little closet where we're so self-absorbed with our particular interests, and even if and we're talking about the things of God that are maybe important, but if we can't step out of that and engage in the world around us, then we really lose touch and cease to be effective, because people, again, I know it's so trite, but it's so true. People really don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. And if you want an audience with people, you have to earn that by showing interest in things that they're interested in. And this is just a narrow part of this discussion. But we're talking about life balance. And part of life balance is having a little bit of self-awareness. And another thing is finding legitimate, genuine interests that can occupy your time, bring refreshing and recreation to you, so that when you're not behind the pulpit or you're not studying, you have other things that are revitalizing to you. And if you find yourself not able to enjoy those without a sense of guilt, I should be doing something more important, then that is a good evidence you're out of balance and your life is not in balance the way it should be.
And I want to mention briefly on the last point, and then I do want to move into more of like what we do to rest and relax. But I think also it takes a lot of humility from ourselves to be able to be interested in other people, because I have met individuals where, and maybe it's just the upbringing I had, or maybe it's my interest field of like wanting to know other cultures, wanting to know other people, and being the extrovert, because I find information fascinating and I can always learn something from someone else. And that's why I think intelligence is a weird thing to try and measure, because if you were to ask me about fishing, I'd know nothing. And if we were to try and, for some reason, get lost in the middle of like a swamp and the only way to survive is fishing, I'd be out of luck. And the dude that knows everything about fishing would be the best person there. But I think oftentimes it takes humility of getting outside of ourselves. And because I've met people where they approach another culture or approach someone from a different background or upbringing, and they're like, well, why are they like that? Well, they shouldn't be that way. They should just think this way. And it frustrates me to a great extent, because they don't have a concept, they don't have a background, a vernacular, a place to be able to understand the position you're from.
Yeah.
And that's why I think meeting people from so many different backgrounds and hearing their stories, we start to realize, oh, they've never had the opportunity, the privilege to experience what I've experienced, or be exposed to what I've been exposed to. I mean, and I think that's partly, again, from my upbringing. At a young age, I got to drive around a lot of America, and people were like, well, that's not a lot of diversity. Well, if you grow up in the East Coast and then you move to the like West Coast, I mean, growing up in Vermont, you see a bunch of white people, and there's no like food exposure. And I'm saying this as someone who grew up in Vermont, and you go and get Chinese food, it's American Chinese. You go and get Mexican food, it's Taco Bell. I mean, that's your like cultural experience. And then you move to California, and all of a sudden you see a whole Hispanic culture, depending if you're like in the southern part of California. You move up north, you have a greater Asian influence. You go to Hawaii, you get a whole different melting pot of things. You go to Alaska, you get the Inuit tribes. And so you just have all these different cultures around America. And if you grow up traveling and experiencing, and even traveling to different countries, all of a sudden you see a different world open up. And it takes a lot of humility to be like, well, my point of view might not be right. How did they grow up? I want to know how they experience things. And in doing so, you gain a lot of interest, and you get to be invited into the inner circle of a lot of people's lives because you take an interest in them. I remember one time, it was shortly after we'd moved to California, and I was talking with my uncle, and I had just gotten back from church, and there were so many, like, moving out here is just like trying to meet all these new people and remember everything. And I was talking to him, and I was like, I don't remember the name, not important. And he's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I meant it like it's not an important part of the story, but he's like, even if it's not an important part of the story, it's important to them, buddy. And he's like, people's names are important to them, and you need to do everything you can to remember them. And it stuck with me. Now when I meet people, I'm like, okay, gotta remember their name, because like it or not, I mean, we all do that thing of like, sorry, I'm not good with names, and then that person's like, oh, I wasn't remembered. But when you remember someone's name, when someone remembers your name, they're like, yeah, I remember you. You were blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, I feel special all of a sudden. And so taking the humble approach and just taking an interest in people and realizing, my point of view, my background, my upbringing might not be the best. it might have not been the most correct. Why don't I take the humble approach and learn from their culture, learn from their experience? Um, but all that to say, on the side of taking interest, but also getting over to finding rest for yourself. I think oftentimes we can get very guilted into the we must like hurry because like we must make the most of the time for the days are evil and we must
Right.
hasten the day and all these different things. And the reality is, though, how are you going to help someone if you're an empty shell of a man? And I think it was C.S. Lewis that talked about men without chests, of just being hollow men with no sense of substance inside of them. And I think oftentimes that can happen because we get so mission oriented and task oriented that we often forget what is the deeper meaning for which we're doing this. What is the beauty of life that God created? And we don't take time to find spiritual rest or physical rest, emotional, mental. And I remember there's something in college that our campus ministry all kind of had to take a step back and think like, okay, we need to find ways to rest for ourselves. Cause yeah, we're doing great ministry wise, but everyone here is like burnt out and like getting snippy with everyone. So it's kind of one of those, okay, everyone, what's something that you find restful? Now, this question ranges the gamut because all of a sudden you have people being like, I like being home alone in a dark room reading. And it's like, I'm like, wow, that sounds miserable. I'm like, I like being in a room full of people that I know and like talking and just like nonstop talking for hours on end. Everyone's like, what? And I mean, you had people that wanted to play board games, people that wanted to be outside playing sports, some people that wanted to go on a hike, some people that just wanted to talk, and some people wanted to cook. And depending on your range, like what you find restful is going to be different than others. But when we took those times to just rest and focus on rest for that semester, all of a sudden our lives, our relationships all started improving. Our desire to want to know God and to interact with one another got better because we weren't becoming these empty shells, like tired and burnt out and frustrated and angry at everything because we just felt overworked, underappreciated. And
Right.
that's what happens when we start just forgetting to rest. And I mean, the reason God took a Sabbath wasn't for his benefit. God is all powerful. We know this. And so we have to stop and think, well, why did God make a Sabbath? Well, it was an example for us because we needed to follow that model of we need to rest at least one time, like one of the days out of the week. And they've done studies where when people follow like the Sabbath model, their family lives are better, their mental health are better, their physical health is better. All these stats just rapidly improve. They tend to be better performers at their job. They tend to be higher paid employees. And it's all because they get this sense of rest and like centralizing what is important on them, taking that day to spend with family or doing their hobby or their passion or whatever it is. And I mean, why else do we work so hard if not to support our passions, our hobbies, to support our families? So if we're taking these jobs to support those things that matter to us, why not take time to enjoy those things?
Yeah. This became real for me as I was entering into my 50s. I asked the Lord, and many people have heard me say this before. I've talked a lot about it. I asked the Lord to make my 50s my most fruitful decade. And interestingly, a study came out some time ago. We've talked about, I think, on this broadcast before. And I don't remember who did the study, but it was like a reputable magazine. Like, I don't know if it was New England Journal of Medicine or I forget what it was, but maybe not medicine, but some kind of, but they were saying that the most productive time in a person's life is between 60 and 70. Now that shocked me. I thought, because we're such a youth oriented culture, I thought they'd say, between your 30s and 40s or whatever. But no, people produce the most between their 60s and 70s. Interestingly, the second most fruitful decade was between 70 and 80. And then next, I think it was 50 to 60. And then down further. And I think part of that is because you have now some knowledge and life experience, something to contribute. But when they talk about people that were presidents of like educational institutions or banks or, millionaires, or it all comes down to having life experience behind you and producing much because you have so much background, you have so much foundation. So it was an appropriate prayer. And I have to say, God answered that prayer. During my 50s, I wrote hundreds of essays. I preached thousands of messages. For a while, I was preaching 10 times a week. I started broadcasting overseas, first of all, doing Skype crusades where we saw 2,000 saved in a 2-year period of time and hundreds of healings. And then we went on television where we were literally, I think our largest monthly audience I ever saw was 11 million. We saw 575 saved that month, but there's been months we've seen 700 saved. So nearly 1,000, between 500 and 1,000 people in a single month. I hadn't seen that many people up to that time saved my whole life, in all those years pastoring. And that was on a monthly basis. We were seeing, 100 saved. And then I wrote, like I said, 4 books. I was, professor at Summit. I pioneered a church, pastored another church. And I mean, it went on and on and on, all these different things the Lord allowed me to do. But I'm 58 now, I'll be 59 in September. As I approached probably around the 57-year mark, Cameron, I began to sense an earnest amount of burnout. And it's called compassion fatigue, where you begin to hear about somebody comes to you with a real need. And people are going to think this sounds horrible, but I'm telling you, it's a real thing. And somebody will be saying, brother, can you help us? Brother, I'd have to die to care less, is what you're thinking in your head. And you say, well, that sounds horrible, Randy. You're supposed to love people, the love of Jesus. Yeah, you are. But again, we come to the limit of our capacities and get to the point where something in you just snaps and you've exceeded your capacity. And I know the hyper spiritual people, brother, if you'd prayed in tongues more, if you had just, been more spiritual, if you'd blah, 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 I've heard it all, from people who've never done anything. But I'm telling you, you can reach a point where you get beyond your capacity to perform, or, beyond your capacity to have enough, mental stamina, spiritual stamina, physical stamina. And you get to a point where you realize I've been running at a pace that is not maintainable. And so I reached that point a little late, and I would kind of, like I said, I got to this point of compassion fatigue where I would have needs coming at me online all the time. Brother, would you preach here? And I realized every one of these opportunities is attached to a price tag. They want me to give here, they want me to give. And then if you're not careful, you get very cynical, because even though the need is legitimate and the ministries may be, there are a lot of people out there, particularly in the developing nations, that are just trying to con you and rob you. And I have dear friends over in those nations that warn people like us all the time. If you don't know that ministry, if you don't have boots on the ground, if you don't know them personally, do not give, because there's so many scams out there. And so that's kind of my policies. If I don't know you, I'm probably not going to invest money in some overseas thing. I don't know what I'm giving to. I don't know who I'm giving to. I don't know what you're doing with that money. You can say ministry, but it could be anything. Or you could be using those orphanages or children to exploit money from, compassionate people in the West who feel like, we're so overprivileged, we have guilt, so we're going to give to something we're not even aware of what we're giving to. So I kind of reached this point of cynicism, burnout, and then just by ministering so much, I felt like I'm just done. So I quit producing content. Plus, I started working also as a chaplain in more recent times within the last year. And then that kind of just eliminated my capacity to produce content and do a lot of the things I was doing, simply because I didn't have the time. And so if you take all those considerations, I kind of got to the point where, like, I really felt like 2023 was a time for me to step back away. Not from, here I am on a podcast, so not from everything. I'm still preaching twice on Sundays, and we do the podcast, and I still teach at Summit. So it's not like I've quit everything, but particularly with some of the international stuff, I just felt like I need to step back and not put the pressure on myself, to have money to pay for this and that. And then, just producing content with every moment off I have away from work. And so I think that, there's probably a lot of people that will hear this that will say, I can identify with that. I might not have said it as bluntly as you did, Brother Andy, but the thing is, somebody needs to say it, because a lot of people are thinking it and are afraid to identify it unless they come across as being unspiritual. No, you're not unspiritual. You're a human being. You're not the savior. And so none of us have the weight of the world on our shoulders. Again, Jesus said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So if we burned out, what burden were we carrying? It wasn't a yoke the Lord gave us. It was a yoke we put on our own shoulders. So there's a difference between being fruitful and being busy. And it's easy to conflate the two, but they're not the same thing. And so I have kind of purposed to say, I'm not going to put myself in a position where I feel like I have to do anything unless I know that the Lord has said, this is, I want you to do this. But rather, I want to step back, recalibrate, pray, kind of seek the Lord for a clearer path, and then do those things that are both life-giving, not just to other people, but to me. Because I believe, Cameron, when you're following your authentic calling, that thing that's at the core of your being that God's really called and gifted you to do, it's life-giving, not life-sapping. And I think too often what we've done is we've let ambition or need, Jesus said, the poor you'll have with you always. So you can't meet all the needs. You can't be need-driven. You have to be spirit-driven or spirit-led. Never be driven, always be led. So I think that these are just some of the things that, made this issue real to me. that made me realize I've got to step back from some stuff and give myself time. And of course, I found some hobbies we'll talk about in a minute that have been very much soul feeding, soul nourishing, soul replenishing to me. And somebody might look at it and think it's not all that spiritual. And I would disagree with them completely. I would say I think it's extremely spiritual, because anytime we're filling our tank, that enables us to be encouraged, to be refreshed, to come back at the next day with more vitality. I think that's a positive in our life.
I think we often too don't realize the limited time we have.
Yeah.
I mean, time goes quick, and the older you get, the more you realize it. And then also, if you just realize your breakdown for a day, normally the average person's going to sleep a third of their life away. If you're getting 8 hours of sleep a night, which for a long time I was like, well, I'll just not sleep that much. Sleep is such a time waster. And I still feel like that it wastes so much time. However, your quality of life significantly is reduced if you don't get good sleep. Your weight, your mental health, your memory, the list literally is just endless for how much sleep matters for your body. And so you should be getting 8 hours of sleep, or at least 7. And then we look at work. We normally work 8 hours a day, but let's say we have to get up in the morning and get ready, and we get ready, we shower, we eat, and let's say that's 30 minutes to an hour. You drive to work for another 30 minutes, you get to work, you also have a lunch break, so that makes your workday more actually 9 hours probably, because you have an hour lunch break, most people. And then you drive home at the end of the day, another 30 hours, or sorry, 30 minutes, not 30 hours. Whew, man, that would be a commute. Yeah. So you've already gotten 17, 18, 19, depending on all of that, hours out of your day. So what do you have left? You have about 5 hours. Okay, you're going to spend some time maybe with your family, but you also have chores. When do you get your hair cut? When do you do your laundry? When do you do the dishes? When do you do all those miscellaneous things that need constant maintenance, the car, the house? I mean, the reality is, and a lot of our free time comes down to a couple hours after work, 1 or 2, and then maybe our weekend, if it's not filled up with family events, church events, other things, our kids' games, or other things that we can just fill our very short time up very quickly. And so you end up being limited to a couple hours a week. And so are you investing that time wisely into doing something that's going to build you up and strengthen you and encourage you and get you in a better position to help others and yourself? Or are you wasting it scrolling through Facebook, scrolling through Instagram? And I don't mean these as a negative thing. Sometimes that might be a great thing, because let's say your family lives in another state and the only way you can keep up with your grandkids, maybe keep up with your friends, is by seeing the photos they post. That's not a negative time waste.
Right.
But when you're just scrolling endlessly, watching stupid videos, at some point it's like, is that really what's filling you up? And I mean, my friends and I had this conversation quite a bit regarding free time, especially when we were all working. There's a time when all of us were like working multiple jobs and having a family. And it's like, okay, I do 40 hours at this job, 20 hours at this job. I come home and spend time with my family and I have nothing left for me. And all of us were getting just like frustrated and angry, because it's like, well, I guess there's no fun in life left. And the reality is we start looking very pessimistic at life. And like I said, 2/3 of your life has gone away from sleeping and work. And the other third is like spent doing a lot of things that we have to do. So we should be making wise decisions. And I mean, in leadership, it's a principle that John Maxwell gives consistently, and it's to grow up, you have to give up. And meaning that you're going to have to give up something in your life. You can't go to every soccer game. You can't be a part of every sporting event. You can't go to every party. You can't go to every thing you're invited to, or try and learn everything. So it's, what do you invest your time in, and choosing it wisely, so that in order to grow in that area and best support yourself, your family, your ministry, whatever it is, you have to choose wisely. How am I going to pour into myself? How am I going to build myself up to be a better husband, a better wife, a better father, a better mother, a better son, a better daughter, a better minister, a better employee? How do we do that in order to benefit everyone else, but also ourselves?
Yeah, I think this is one of the reasons why there was a big movement on the minimalistic movement. and many people have probably seen this. And the minimalistic movement basically says minimize your life, remove stuff, possessions, things. Doesn't mean you don't live in a house, but have that house cut down to the bare minimum. Don't have, excess furniture, excess cars, excess this, excess that. Paul Scanlon preached a message years ago called the tyranny of things. And everything you own requires care, maintenance, money, time. You got multiple cars, you got to wash those cars, you got to clean that house. If you have a lot of knickknacks, those have to be dusted. So these are things that eat into our time. And so there's a big minimalist movement now going on where people are talking about, not just the feng shui of your house, but part of it, even that, cutting down furniture so the cleaning time is less, cutting down things out of your schedule, only getting by with the things you genuinely need, not buying a lot of unnecessary stuff that, now it's going to find itself in the closet anyway, never be utilized. And so I think there's something to be said for this. I could really benefit by that. I'd love to have somebody come in and just start removing things for me. And I guess they actually have people who will do that for you. And, but I'm one of these people that I don't think I'm a pack rat until I look at my desk. I think, dear God, where'd all this junk come from? And I'll keep this edition of this magazine because I may want to look at this years later. And it's like, no, I won't. If I haven't picked it up by now, I'm not going to. And I used to have a 2-week rule that, if I have something sat on my desk for 2 weeks, I'm not going to, if I haven't been interested in it yet, I ain't going to be interested in the future. Now, because some of these are my off-roading magazines, I make an exception for them. But for most things, it's true. If you've got a piece of mail you haven't bothered to look, unless it's a bill coming due, you're waiting to pay, throw it away. You're not going to read it later. Oh, that's an interesting story. Well, then read it, file it, and get rid of it. Get it off your mental plate, because many of our mental plates are so full. They're like Fibber McGee's closet where you open it up and things come crashing down on you. And a lot of people need to minimalize their life. They need to minimalize the mental junk on their plate so that they can be more at rest. That's why people can't rest, because the moment they sit down, they think of all the stuff they got to do because they've got this clutter that is occupying their time and attention, even when they're trying to rest. And, there's no good. It's like somebody gave a great analogy. You got maybe a guy who's got business he needs to take care of at the office, but he's got a golf appointment with a buddy of his. And then as he's on his way to the golf course, his wife calls and says, hey, the plumbing's messed up and now there's water spraying out of the sink. When you get home, I need you to take care of it. And he said he plays the worst round of golf. Why? Because his mind is at the office, his heart is at home, and his body's on the golf course. And so there's something to be said for wherever you are, be all there. And that requires uncluttering our lives from things that are not as essential as what all the noise is telling us it is. Everything is competing for our attention, people, things, obligations. So it's better to, resolve things, get them taken care of, get that off your plate. Don't leave things undone. Don't have this clutter that's wearing you out and wearing you down because, well, I made this obligation or I need to get to this. And I've got some of those like loose ends hanging. I hate loose ends. I love it when something's accomplished, neat, tidy, done. Thank God it's done. Everybody had a good time. We got it done. Now it's off my plate. Now I can move on to the next thing. And I think a lot of people are living with so many loose ends, Cameron, so much unfinished business that they can't rest. They can't take time away. And so their life balance is so out of whack. And this might be true for a minister, might be true for a housewife. It could be true for anybody. But we just have to, if we're going to rest, we have to have some kind of form of authentic rest. And so there is a word we use in our language all the time that I think we have lost the understanding. It's in the word itself, recreation. It's recreation. And so I think everybody, every preacher for sure, but everybody needs a good hobby. I just believe everybody needs some kind of interest. It might be painting. It might be working with clay. It might be taking long walks and looking at nature. That's the one thing I really believe we should do. We need to be outdoors more. I listened to a neuroscientist that's from Stanford. He talks a lot about nutrition and so forth. I can't think of his name right now, but he was talking about the importance of sunlight early in the morning and what it does for our health and our mood. So much depression we have, Cameron, because we're shut away in dark rooms staring at screens all day. Well, duh, no vitamin D, we're going totally against nature. So we need to kind of reverse engineer this modern life we've created. You and I are in front of the screen now, but other than my necessity at work, I'm in front of the screen probably literally 50% less than I was, let's say 2-3 years ago, when all I was doing was studying and broadcasting, and I'm out in nature more. I'm outdoors more, and it has done wonders for me. And the only thing I regret is I don't have time to do it more.
And I mean, I think even about like when I was younger, I spent a lot of time playing video games, which I mean, I'm still good at video games and I love them and they're great. Nothing against them. Um, but when I got to high school and I started getting more friends and becoming out of my like shell more, I would say. A lot of them wanted to do stuff outside. And I realized how much more I loved it. And I know some people are like, well, that's great for you. That's just not me. And the reality is, I think that's the mindset you're going into where I was like, well, I guess I'll just try it out. Let's see what happens. And still now, like Jody and I, for example, right before we did this podcast, like I got off work and we ran to the park real quick and played pickleball, which is why I came on with wet hair and it's still drying, is because we decided to play pickleball. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's like a hybrid of tennis and ping pong, and it's fantastic. So if you haven't tried
Oh,
it,
I
give it
thought
a
it was. I
shot.
would thought it was balls with. I thought you used pickle as the ball. No, I'm kidding. I know.
That's a dad joke for any of you that really question if he's my dad. There's a dad joke for you. Uh, so I mean, getting out and getting involved with just one like exercise, the amount of benefit that it is for you. I mean, there's a reason that any health coach, any nutritionist specialist will say that, yeah, you should be doing some type of exercise, whether it's walking for 30 minutes or getting exercise. I mean, they say that you should be active 30 minutes a day, something to elevate your heart rate for 30 minutes a day.
Yep.
And so getting outside, getting that vitamin D, getting active, and then being involved with community and having fun, it does something that we just can't replicate when we're working in front of a computer. I
Yes.
mean, even if you love your job, it's not the same. And there's a certain amount of getting involved with something different, getting outside,
Yeah.
that is needed in us. I mean, God created the world in such a beautiful way. And it's amazing the more you learn about nutrition and a lot of different things of how our bodies work, how well God designed the world to work with our bodies. I mean, take, for example, water. We have still never created anything as remarkable as water, as that it can give us power. It can hydrate us better than anything else. I mean, it'll clean out wounds that we needed to. Like water is a powerful force. It can unlock energy, endless energy. I mean, you use a little bit of nuclear energy, but yeah, it still use water to power it. And it's all of a sudden one of the strongest sources of energy that we have available to us. And so it's just this incredible thing that can put out fires,
Yeah.
we can cook our food with it. And it's something that we need for life. I mean, you can go 40 days or more without food, and people have, but you can't go 40 days without water. And so, I mean, the way that God designed the earth and different things on it, I mean, even vegetables, trees, fruits, the amount of nutritional benefit that come in, we artificially create something and it's nowhere near as healthy
Yeah.
as when we just take vitamins or when we take vegetables and fruits and the vitamins we get from that.
Yeah. So let's talk about our particular. You mentioned pickleball. That's one thing you and Jody like to do. So let's talk a little bit about our interest. Most people who know me know. In fact, it's funny because people who know me from like more recent times, let's say like the people I began working with, some of them might even think, "Oh, Randy's the Jeep guy," because I own two Jeeps. In fact, it was kind of cool. We were talking about points of connection earlier, right? My dad in heaven must be laughing his ever loving head off, because the joke is when I was a teenager, my dad, was going to show me how to work on a car. We had our heads underneath the hood. He went to show somebody something. He turned to say something to me, and I was gone. And I like to think I had some really important teenage business to take care of, but the fact of the matter was I was not interested in cars. As long as you give me a gas card or the key, Dad, I'm good to go. That's kind of my philosophy. Well, today I'm the owner of two Jeeps, and I was getting my oil changed in my off-road, my designated off-road vehicle. I have, really my Gladiator that I have is a daily driver. That's my car. And we got it so we could also tow the trailer that we have. And so when I was in an accident, many people know I was in an accident last year, a very severe accident. Unfortunately, it was fatal for the other driver that somehow swerved into my lane and hit me. But after that car was totaled, we had to get another vehicle. So we knew we were going to be getting a trailer. I got a Toyota Tacoma. The trailer was a little bit larger than what we anticipated, so it needed a little bit sturdier vehicle. So I ended up trading it in for a Gladiator. I already had my Wrangler, which was my off-road vehicle. So now I have two Jeeps. And so this guy at those, talking to me about my vehicle today, he was asking me about where I got the tires and, the shock system, or, the lift kit. And I said, well, and somehow it came up that I also had a Gladiator. He said, you have both? And he got really excited. Well, now I have an immediate point of connection with him. And I'm wearing my hospice chaplain badge the whole time because I'm doing this on my lunch hour. And so he's looking at me and I'm thinking this is a good thing for him to see, that here's a guy that's a chaplain in ministry, but he likes Jeeps. He likes to go off road. And he asked me, he said, how much are you off road in that vehicle? I said, all the time. I said, that Jeep is on the off road 90% of the time. And the 10% it's on the road, it's taking me off road, except for the rare days that I take it to work simply because I want to drive it. But I remember, Cameron, when I started doing this, first of all, I had a different Jeep and realized I needed a different one, a better one, if I'm going to do the off-roading that I do. And of course, we've modified it a lot, worked on it a lot, added, tires, suspension, all this kind of stuff. But I remember one day, Cameron, driving in that one of my Jeeps while I was, just one of those afternoons. I got my Jeep after work and I just went out into the fields. And I remember just feeling so, I don't know how to explain it. I just fed my soul. Because I learned how to drive in my dad's Volkswagen dune buggy that he made, to climb the hills when we went hunting. And that's how I learned how to drive a 4-speed, was in the hills behind my home, where I now live again in the same town. And I remember telling my wife, I want a man car. I've never owned a man car, like a Hummer or something. I didn't know what I wanted, but I realized what I wanted was a Jeep. So I ended up getting this Jeep and start riding the same hills that I, started driving when I was 15, 16 years old, learning to drive. So now I'm learning to four-wheel. And, I realized, it would have been really advantageous if I'd have kept my head under that hood so I could work on my own Jeep. But thankfully, God blessed me with a son-in-law that I recruit to be my mechanic from time to time. Long story short, though, Cameron, I found that in addition to that, also using my skills as a videographer to film our adventures. And I pastor an older congregation, one of our churches that we oversee. And I just created, for example, a little bitty mini movie that I put on my Facebook page. If you want to just scroll down, folks, you can see it's allowed. It's the thing right under this, of the wildflowers, and put a little bit of music behind it. People are, how do you get those aerial shots? Well, I'm a pilot. No, I'm not a pilot. I have a drone. So anyway, this became my thing. And at first I posted stuff just because I was excited and sharing it. And then so many people got something out of it that it kind of became a ministry unto itself. And I realized you don't have to be preaching to be ministering to people. There's people that are shut in that can't see the wildflowers. And so just sharing my hobby has got other people enthusiastic, about these same kinds of things. And I think that's good, because when we're authentically engaged and passionate about something, that passion's contagious. And it may not mean that they want to go buy a Jeep or that they want to go drive among the wildflowers, but what it does mean is, I can see this is something that's valuable to him, that's refreshing him, that's bringing life to him. And I know he's a preacher and he does all these other things, but it's okay for him to have this other side to himself. And Cameron, I have to tell you, for a while, it was hard for me to have that other side to myself. I feel, am I backsliding? Am I backsliding having a Jeep? Is it okay for me to be spending time away from these other endeavors, to be just doing something I enjoy? Is that okay? I mean, I struggled with some of that stuff because my mind was, got to be plowing away, but it's been another dimension of life that has made me more relatable. I think in many ways a more valuable asset to the kingdom of God, because I can now relate to people in that world. Now I go to these expos where that's what people are there for, and I can communicate to them in their language rather than, bringing them into my kind of esoteric world of biblical stuff. I can relate to a larger world because of this. And that's just one aspect, but I think that that's helpful. And I also lift weights and stuff like that. So I can communicate to people on that level. But I think it's so important that we have outside interests, hobbies, things that feed our soul, that enable us to relate to other people and kind of give us a normalcy, with people that are not a part of our world, because it helps us to have a bridge to theirs.
One of my mentors from Hawaii, I admire, because he has a personality that he's very direct, and a lot of people will find it often abrupt. And I think it's just in a lot of ways admirable, because it's just not a personality trait that I do well. I'm not a very direct individual. I tend to be more try to be a tactful individual, and I can be very blunt, but I have to know you very well. But he can just be blunt with people he doesn't know, or direct with people he doesn't know. And he does tabletop games. For those of you who don't know what tabletop games are, you might think of things like Settlers of Catan or Ticket to Ride or D&D or any of these games that you might be like, I might have heard of that. Those are some of the more famous ones, but tabletop games are just board game pretty much, but they're more sophisticated than you would think like a game like Starry is or like Monopoly is. So they're more normally involved and whatnot. But he does a lot of tabletop games. And he does it with just different groups that aren't like believers. And I cannot tell you how many people he has ended up leading to Christ through tabletop games and his direct attitude. Because he'll just be like playing with them and he'll get to know them for a while and he'll be like, hey, what do you think about Jesus? What do you think about life after death? Where do you think you're going after you die? And he'll just directly like lay it down. And all of a sudden that tabletop game that was like, haha, and you're like all of a sudden like, oh no, where am I going? What is afterlife? And he'll be like, hey, would you want to read the Bible someday? And they're like, yeah, I guess I would. And he's like, I'll read it with you. I know it can be complicated. And they're like, yeah, that'd be great. And it's just a different interest field that he can find people in, because the reality is oftentimes people are so longing for connection and community.
Yeah.
And if you have a passion about something and you're able to bring people into that, I mean, reality is if you don't have a passion, nobody's going to want to hear anything about it or join
Right.
you in it. I
Right.
mean, I think about the different things like games or sports or pseudo sports I've gotten into. It's been because people have been interested. And if you're wondering why I said pseudo sports and air quotes, is because when I was in Hawaii, one of my friends was obsessed with Quidditch. And if you're wondering what Quidditch is, it's the game in Harry Potter, but people made it into a real game in real life. And so I have photos of me like running around with like a PVC pipe between my legs, playing Quidditch and throwing balls between like little rings upright. And the reason I got into it is because one of my friends was super passionate about it. And he's like, no, Cameron, you don't realize how fun it is. It is like and I was like, okay, I'll do it. I did medieval sword fighting in college because, man, I'm just laying out how much of a nerd I am. I did medieval sword fighting in college because I was watching a bunch of like people on a lawn and I was like, hey, can anyone do this? And it's because they looked like they were having fun. And so, I mean, I didn't stop until I ended up getting one of the guys got mad at me and he did an illegal strike and cut my eye. And that eye still has issues to this day. So I was
I'm
like,
really glad
I'm
I
done.
don't know about this when you were doing it.
And I mean, another sport that like was a newer one is spike ball that I got into in college because one of my friends was like, "No, you've never played it. It's one of the most fun games you'll ever play." Still is to me one of the most fun games I've ever played. Pickleball I got into because one of my friends was an instructor and was like, "Hey, you should give it a try one time. Like I'm becoming a professional in this." I'm like, "Becoming a professional?" Like he's like, "Yeah, like there's tennis professionals. I'm a professional in pickleball now." And I'm like, "Okay." And so find an interest that you can get passionate in and that other people outside of the church would be interested in. Don't get me wrong, if you're passionate about memorizing scripture, it'll come into play at some point, but the chances of you like finding someone outside of the church that is also interested in memorizing scripture is going to be slim to none. So find something that you can be passionate in and learn to enjoy it. I mean, the best salesmen in life are people that have a passion for the product they're selling. I mean, people often joke with me and how I should work at Apple. And the reason why is because if you start talking to me about computers and you have a PC or you have an Android phone, chances are by the time we're done talking, you'll be buying an Apple product. And you're like, haha, very funny. Like, I'm sure. I'm not joking. I got my work to just buy 8 brand new Apple iPhones for one of their schools because I'm like, hey, you guys want better like devices to like take photos on and tablets to work off of and all these different things. And I was like, look, the reality is you're about to pay this much for Android tablets, but you could buy a cheap iPhone like the iPhone SE and get better quality cameras, and no one's going to try and steal the phones because they're not the top grade ones. And they're like, okay, we'll do that. I got my in-laws just recently to buy 2 brand new iPhones that are more top of the line because they were talking about their phones. I'm like, well, the issue is this, and this. And all of a sudden they're buying 2. I just got my wife a brand new computer and like phone because she had a PC and it was, as I say, PC, piece of crap. And so it was having issues. And so I was like, hey, chances are like, reality is if you get an Apple, it's not going to have these issues. And not only that, but I can help you work on it. And if you run into, and this has been the case for so many jobs I've worked at, so many friends I've interacted with have switched. And the reason why is because I'm passionate about it. I think
Yeah.
they make a great product. I'm not going to say I necessarily agree with everything the company does, but they make a great product. So, and the reality is, if you're passionate about something, whether I do volleyball every week with a group of friends because one of those friends was a college athlete and was going to try and go towards like Olympic status, and she ended up getting injured, wasn't able to, but she does a volleyball like thing every weekend because she's passionate about it, and she got a bunch of friends into it as well, and so we all play volleyball.
Yeah.
If you find an interest that you can just really be passionate about, people are going to flock to it no matter what, because passion is contagious.
Yes,
People that have passion and drive and excitement, it's contagious. I mean, I'm the first to say that if you come to me passionate about something that I don't know anything about, chances are I'll probably be interested, just because I'm like, if someone's this passionate about it, I want to know. And then when you find a passion like that, that's recreational, and you introduce it with your passion for Jesus, well, they realized, well, they got me into volleyball, they got me into tabletop games, they got me into X, Y, or Z, and they were right about that. And it was a lot of fun. Well, there must be something about this Jesus fellow that they're telling me about.
I think that's true. It's always been true of me. I'm always been a recruiter for whatever I'm passionate about. And I think it's just because whatever you have a real conviction, authentic conviction about, there's a certain level of persuasion because it's belief and you're passing your belief on. And, it's interesting if you go to a church and, let's say you've got some good quality people there. They love Jesus, they're faithful in their church attendance, they're tithers, all that kind of thing. And they come to church and they're excited to be there. But then have some coffee and cookies afterward, or listen to them when they're in the foyer, or listen to them when they're at the social hall over a cup of coffee. What are they talking about? You'll find out where their passions are. It might be politics. It might be, their children. It might be the recreation that they enjoy doing. But you'll find out that they're probably not talking about, again, the original languages or the Greek and the Hebrew, or you know what I'm saying? So I'm not saying those things aren't important. Obviously, we're in ministry. We value that stuff extremely. But I think it's very easy for us that are in ministry to get these, I don't know, this cloistered mindset where we think these are the real important things. And, with people that are in that field, I was sharing with one of my colleagues the other day, because we're all ministers, chaplains, obviously, but we're ministers. And so I was talking to him about Michael Heiser's books. And I was pretty passionate about it. And after we got done, he said, boy, I sure like to hear you talk. Well, what he likes is that passion is contagious. It's the enthusiasm is contagious. Plus he was learning things, so there's nothing wrong with being passionate about the things of God and communicating that passion to other people. But like you said, if that's your only starting point and they don't have an interest in those things already, then you need a bridge. You need something to connect you to them and earn their friendship and their trust, and let them see you're kind of a normal human being. Because, to the world at large today, Cameron, America is becoming more and more like Europe, where a smaller and smaller percentage of people have bought into the authority of the scriptures or faith in God. And so they need to kind of see us as relatable, normal people. We got to kind of earn a platform of credibility with them. And there's always going to be that person, oh, brother, you just need to trust the Holy Spirit. And that's the problem. You get these, I saw some poor fella the other day. I knew the moment he asked a question, dude, why did you even put that on Facebook? He was saying something about, like, hey, anybody got any good recommendations for, some like Christian books, or I'd like to study something. Any recommend? And of course, what do you have? 90%. Why don't you just read the Bible and trust the Holy Spirit? He can give you revelation. You don't need these other books. And it's just ignorance on parade. And so here's somebody that's authentically asking for some input, and he's just, these hyper spiritual people that, and so it's very difficult with the church today. We've lost so much credibility with the world because we come across as weird, as partisan, as some strange little subculture with our own distinctive, language and everything. And we're known way more for what we're against than what we're for. And so the thing I think that rights this ship is having balance in our life where, yes, we're passionate about Jesus. Yes, we love God, but it's not the only thing we can talk about. That's certainly one of the only thing Paul could talk about. Like you said, he spent his whole sermon on Mars Hill bringing people to Christ and never once quoted a scripture. And it's not that scriptures are bad, but he knew he was talking to a Greek-speaking audience who knew nothing about the Bible. But he could find points of connection with them out of their own culture that gave evidence of God, because he created everything. And we need to be appreciative of the things that God has created for us. Like I said, nature. I used to kind of laugh at people that, you hear these people that say, oh, my church, my nature is, my church is nature, or my church is the outdoors. And, that's basically a lame excuse most of the time for people to not be committed to a local fellowship. And that's wrong. At the same time, I have to say, there have been times, Cameron, where I'm out in my Jeep, I'm looking at some beautiful, panorama in front of me, setting sun, beautiful wildflowers, the smell of the outdoors. And all of a sudden I realize there is something to be said for that quiet communion with, and here we are, here you are with the other parts of nature, very conscious of your creator somehow. And there's something to be said for that. I'm not saying it replaces obviously church, or it replaces Bible study or fellowship with other believers, but there is something about connectedness with our world outside of just the church house. And I think we've created a lot of, we created unnecessary hurdles for people, because Christianity isn't a building. It's not a suit. It's not all these things that we've attached to it. It's not even necessarily certain creedal statements. You must believe this, you must believe that. And certainly you and I believe in good doctrine and orthodoxy and all that kind of stuff. But we've just added too much alloy to the purity of the gospel. And I think if we could just be authentic human beings, wanting to connect with others, being interested in them, demonstrating the love of Christ, we can earn a platform. And when they see that the foundation of who we are is Jesus, then Jesus becomes attractive rather than the opposite.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's so many good things to say on this side of just needing to rest and to finding interest, and how it just boisters everything about us, and gives us just a new platform to stand on. I just had a thought and it went out of my head.
So what
That's okay.
besides what besides pickleball do you enjoy doing?
Like I said, I mean, all the sports I listed, from Quidditch to spike ball.
Yeah.
Jody and I do pickleball. We do, like I said, volleyball with our friends once a week. Jody and I will do like Mario Kart together because she likes Mario Kart, and I like a lot of video games, but I don't think everyone likes necessarily every video. So for those of you who don't know, I was a very fat kid, and so I spent a lot of time playing video games because I wasn't able to run with everyone else, but I could beat them at video games. So, um, so I mean, there's so many things that, oh gosh, if I have free time, I want to be learning something. I'll read a book. I don't like reading for fun, which a lot of people find frustrating, because I don't read for fun. I read to learn, because to me, learning is fun. Or I'll watch YouTube videos to learn a new skill. One of the things that I've been really wanting to do recently is I've had an obsession recently with trying to learn to make an amazing hamburger. And I think the issue I have is that, like, a lot of people will be like, yeah, that was a great hamburger. And I'm like, no, it wasn't. And they're like, what? How could you say that? I'm like, because at the end of the day, would you rather eat that hamburger again? Or would you rather go to like In-N-Out and get an In-N-Out burger? And they're like, well, and that's the truth about most burgers. You go to a restaurant and you pay for this like expensive burger, and you're like, yeah, I would have been happier with an In-N-Out burger. Something about it is just better. And so I've had this obsession. So I've been watching a lot of videos on cooking, and I love cooking. And so I've done a lot of baking and cooking recently. I mean, and my interest fields are just endless, because there's always something to learn or to be interested in.
Yeah, I'm really interested in people. It's funny because I'm more of an introvert than you. It's funny because your brother is really an introvert, I would say. You're an extrovert and I'm somewhere in the middle, but I think the older I get, the more I tend toward introversion. But one of the things I do love is there used to be a show on A&E, which is a network that's not even in existence anymore. It was Arts and Entertainment Network. And they used to have a show called Biography. And it would show the lives of, everyone from a Kathy Gifford to an Arnold Schwarzenegger to a Peter Jennings to whoever, just all these different people that are maybe known in popular culture, and it would tell their story. And I love people stories. So one of the things I do like about YouTube a lot is not only can you learn a lot, and I've learned a lot from YouTube, like how to change the hinge on the back of my tailgate for my Jeep or whatever, things like that. But you can also learn a lot about people, watching podcasts, listening to people tell their story. Where do they come from? How do they become the successful people they are? All sorts of things that we can learn I don't watch much TV. I usually have maybe one series that I'll be engaged in. Like a while back, it was The Rings of Power when that came out on, Prime. I watched that series, or so I'll watch something. That's a Lord of the Rings thing for those who don't know. But I'll watch something like that maybe occasionally. But most of the stuff I watch is something that I can learn from, and most of it is usually more YouTube or something of that nature, podcast or something like that, where I can grow and learn. But it entertains me. I'm not just doing it because, well, this is my job, I must learn. I like to learn. I enjoy, and every time you learn something new, Cameron, it gives you language to communicate to people in that particular world of whatever it is you're studying. So these things are beneficial for others, they're beneficial for us, and I guess we could go on with this all night long. But the moral of the story is, the more we can have a life of balance, the more effective we're going to be, because number one, we'll last longer. Number two, we'll be able to relate to more people and have language to communicate to them. And we invite both ourselves and others to enter into our mutual interest world, whatever that is. So instead of being foreboding because those are Christian people and they're going to tell you about Jesus, watch out for them, you become the guy who will tell you something about your Jeep or something about pickleball or something, you invite them into an interest that they can buy into. And then they find out, hey, this is really a cool person, and he's really grounded, and he seems to love his family, and he just seems to have peace, and he doesn't get rattled by things I get rattled by. And what makes you tick? And then it turns out that they find out about the foundation of your life being Christ, and it gives you an opportunity to minister from a position of strength and credibility, because you've given evidence that not only can I do those things, but I can also enter your world through a mutual interest. And at the same time, we're refreshing ourselves, we're enjoying life a little bit more, and we're not putting undue pressure on ourselves to perform, because we're not saved by our performance. We're not saved by our ministry. We're saved by the grace of God. And he wants us to enjoy this life. He said, I've come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. And I think too many of us are missing out on that.
And I think one of the things you kind of said it, and I'm going to say it more directly, of that interests are a key to a different world. Interests are the key with which we open the door to a new world.
Yep.
And to give more of an example, you mentioned how we are given a vernacular to speak into that group now. One of the things that I just realized this last summer, when my wife and I went to Brazil, because she had been there for 5 months, taught English to people in the favelas. For those of you who don't know what favelas are, it's the poorest of the poor communities. I know it sounds very like fancy favela, but it's really not. It's the slums of the city, one of the most dangerous and just poorest areas. And so she taught English there for 5 months through a ministry over there. And so when we went over there, we went to visit all the people she knew. And I had the great fortune of just being around some amazing people, and they gave me an opportunity to minister over there. But before doing so, we were interacting with the different individuals. Now, for those of you who don't know, in Brazil, they do not speak Brazilian, they speak Portuguese. It's one of the two countries, that's our main language, Portugal and Brazil. And so I don't speak Portuguese, but they don't care as long as you're willing to play soccer with them. For those of you who don't know, I'm not a gifted soccer player, but it didn't matter at that point. As long as I could play soccer and I could play with their interest, I could step into their world. It opened a different world. All of a sudden, these kids that are watching me like, who is this dude? Well, I mean, they're, besides from the fact that I'm blonde and white, and so they're interested in that, and they want to touch your hair and see like how it feels and everything. All other than that, I'm just some weirdo. But as soon as I start playing soccer, it opened a world to them, and they were willing to hang out with me and spend time with me. No, I couldn't talk to them. I had to talk through a translator, but because I was willing to step into the world, it made a difference. And the reality is that interests are the keys with which we open doors to a new world, and it gives us vernacular. For those of you who don't know what vernacular is, it's just speaking their language, their local language, the language that is esoteric to that group, that appeals to them. And same thing with like my dad and off-roading. A year ago, 2 years ago, if you'd asked him anything about cars or Jeeps off-roading, he'd have no idea anything about them. And if you had started talking about cars, his eyes probably would have glazed over. If you talked about off-roading and Jeeps, he'd been like, oh my goodness, I don't want to. But now it's a different world to him. He's able to interact with people in that arena, and by that have this key that opens the door to a new world for them. So find an interest. If you don't have a passion right now, if you don't have a hobby right now, if you're feeling drained, you need to find a passion. You need to find a hobby. You need to find an interest that gives you life. One of the other hobbies I have is D&D. For those of you who don't know, I actually do D&D every single week. Um, and it's a nerdy thing, but through that, I've already had an opportunity with the people I D&D with, because some of them are believers, some of them are not. And I've had an opportunity to share my beliefs, and they're like, "Oh, wow, you're a Christian and you do D&D?" Yeah, I do. Because I think originally when D&D first came out, it had a very negative
Yeah.
reaction with the church, because it's Dungeons and Dragons and you have all these demons that you're fighting and whatnot. And people were like, "That's of the devil." Obviously, that was when it first came out. It's times have changed, but because I was in a field where it's heavily predominantly non-Christians, I have an opportunity to speak into that group.
Yeah.
So find interest fields that find a hobby that you can have an interest in, find a passion, and start finding a way to relax. And then once you've found a way to rest in that, you can still do things that are beneficial for ministry or for the kingdom or for your family through them. So just my encouragement again, find something, find a passion, find a hobby, and you'll find your life is enriched, and it'll open you up to a whole new world.
Yeah, when you get myopic and you're only interested in one thing, even if it's the things of God, I've noticed, Cameron, people get weird. And I mean, I'm talking about Christians get weird because what they do is, since it's their only world, they have to keep finding something new to retain that interest. So they go for more out there stuff. And so I know Christians, and I don't try to correct them, but I see Christians all the time, some of whom have been students, some people I just know, and I see them recommending books, or I'm so excited about this book. And I won't say the name of one I just saw recently, Cameron, but it literally almost, I couldn't believe that somebody actually wrote a book on the subject. I'll tell you about it privately sometime. But and I thought, and it's, I'm sure it's a huge bestseller because it's so weird and out there that every Christian's probably thinking, this is the key I've been missing, you know. And it just gets weirder and weirder because instead of having normalcy and loving the things of God, if that's our only thing, then we have to find something to keep generating that interest. Because, well, I can't just study the fundamental doctrines of faith. I've already got that, and I got to find something else. I got to find something else. And it gets weirder and weirder, and people get out there further and further. And then when they post their stuff on Facebook, the rest of us are going, "Oh my God, you're a nutcase," and it comes across like that sometimes. And I'm not talking about people that are just passionate about Jesus. I'm talking about people getting out there in weirder and weirder doctrine because, again, we have to have something that continues to keep our wonder engaged and excited. And so that's the danger about, not having a balanced life, and having a community of people around you that can kind of help you stay grounded. But again, if you're just kind of this lone ranger doing your own thing or whatever, it can kind of become dangerous. And then when you try to engage with others, you're just not effective because you've kind of lost touch with where most people are. There's a lot of things, Cameron, I know and believe that I don't share publicly because there would be no context for somebody outside the church or even some people inside the church to be able to receive that. But I'm always shocked at people who put the most weird esoteric things out there on Facebook for public consumption and public criticism. And of course, they get slammed because most people can't relate to that. They have no context or background for it. So I think we have to be conscious and self-aware again when we're on Facebook and we're on these platforms to present a healthy, well-grounded, well-rounded persona so that people feel that we're approachable, that we're not, going to drag them into some dark hole and perform some ritual over them or whatever. But I think some people kind of come across that way. They even do to me, and I've been doing this my whole life. So I just think we have to be self-aware and conscious. And these, like I said, these good hobbies normalize us to a lot of people outside the church that think we're just always, it's just church, church, church. And we have lives too. And we need to be able to share that with others so they can enjoy maybe some of the same interests that we have. So,
And I mean, God made Adam and Eve and he put them in a garden, and it was to like subdue the land, to take care of it, and to enjoy it. And
yeah,
I think oftentimes we forget that aspect. The world that God made was to be enjoyed. Yeah, sin came in and corrupted it, and there's a lot of things that aren't good about the world we live in. But there is still a lot of great things that God has given us and that we can. I mean, for example, why do we pray when we eat food? It's because we're thankful for what God has given us. He's given us and animals that taste delicious. And I'm sorry if I'm offending any vegetarian or vegan right now, but I mean, burgers are fantastic. So I'm grateful. I mean, we can grow wheat and make bread. We can grow like fruit trees and we can grow vegetables. And there's so many great things about just food in general. Um, and then there's things of games and activities that we get to do together. We can sing, make music, art, so many beautiful things that God made in man and creativity, and just even in this world of mountains to hike, valleys to see. I mean, why do we love going to see different like huge wonders like of like nature, like the Grand Canyon, Niagara Falls? Why do we love going to see them? The sequoias, the redwoods. It's because they're like something to be marveled at, because God is marvelous, and oftentimes nature and his creation reflects that, and it's
Yeah.
worth exploring and seeing.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, nature evokes worship. It does me, and it does a lot of people. And it may not be your thing. You know, you may be thinking, well, that's not really me, brother Eddie. No, but something is you. Something is an interest for you. So find what those are and find your tribe, your community of people that enjoy that. Hopefully some believers, but then like you said, maybe some non-believers too. In the Jeeping world, you know, there are these like 4x4 hymn Jeeping community, like they're, for Christians. But it's like, I think I would like to join one that's not just for Christians, because then I can kind of show that preachers can be relatable and have interest too to people that maybe aren't aware of that. So I think it's important that we share our interests, that we have our interests, and that we, still maintain our love for Christ while having a well-rounded life. I think it'll help us to live longer, probably make our families a lot happier, create less frustration because we have a place to vent those things. If you're in ministry, you deal with serious stuff every day. I certainly do. My job, I deal with literally life and death every day. You got to have a place to put that. Otherwise, it gets accumulated in unhealthy places in your heart. So I want to encourage everyone, find something that you love doing, do it, enjoy it with others. No, don't let it become the only focus and obsession of your life, but it can be a part of your life. And it's going to be a healthier, happier you if you find that. So
Well, I just realized we've gone a bit over time, which we did last week as well. I guess maybe our podcasts are just getting longer, but
yeah. Why don't you go ahead and lead us in prayer as we close, Cameron?
we'll do. Lord, we thank you for everything that you have given us. Every good and perfect thing comes from you, Father. We thank you for community and for the world that you've created, that there's good and beautiful things about it to enjoy. We thank you for the opportunity to find community, fellowship, passions, and healthy, positive ways to have a creative outlook, to have a relaxing and restful outlook, that we can take a Sabbath and remember that you created this world and that you created us for rest and for enjoyment as well. We thank you that you help develop passions and interests within us, that you help connect us to communities that we can share Christ-centered fellowship or bring people that aren't believers into a Christ-centered fellowship. We thank you that you're just working in us and doing something new, maybe bringing an interest that we never expected to be interested in, maybe providing an opportunity for a trip or a journey that we didn't expect we'd ever take. We thank you that you're just placing blessings in our life and that you've given us this beautiful world and this amazing people around us to enjoy. We thank you that we don't enter into this time of when condemnation or in guilt, thinking that we're doing something wrong, but that we can enjoy the rest that you've called us to. We thank you, Lord, for everything you're doing in and through our lives. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.
Man, I think what I'm going to do, Cameron, at the end of this video, when I edit it for YouTube, I'm going to put in the last little 2-3 minute, well, it's maybe 3 or 4 minute video that we did, my wife and I, going out with our Jeep and filming the wildflowers, just to give people an idea of a little bit of what we enjoy. Maybe they'll find some commonality in that. But next week we'll be back with something else. We don't know what, but and we've said this before, but if you're interested in hearing us discuss a certain topic, private message us or even put it in the comments. It may not be something we get to right away, but it may be something we can talk about, or maybe you just have a question that you would like discussed. Last week's, Cameron, was our most popular broadcast when we talked about women in ministry. So even though, like you said, it kind of was a little bit not stressful, but it was an intense conversation. It's hard for a lot of people to wrap around. So we just kind of wanted to have something that was a little bit lighter this week, but we don't mind getting into the weeds with stuff. It's just we need to feel like we have a purpose and it's going to have value for people. So join us next week. We'll be back, and God bless you guys. Thank you for joining us today.
Bye-bye.